بسم الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا صالحا. اللهم وفقنا إلى ما تحبه وترضاه. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين بك وأصلح ذات بيننا وأصلح قلوبنا وأحوالنا يا رب العالمين. آمين. So I want to, as some of you may have seen on the announcement, it wasn't specifically announced earlier in the week, but later in the week, as in today, I posted what I was going to talk about. So as some of you may know, these evening sessions once a month from myself are supposed to be revolving around contemporary issues and how we can think about them as Muslims or deal with them as Muslims. One time we took the opportunity to speak on the concept of racism and anti-blackness, and we used an article by Imam Zayd Hafidhullah. And then one time we spent the evening, I believe it was, discussing what we can learn from Hadith sciences in order to better understand the news. And this time we're going to talk about mental illness, mental health and mental illness. So the opening remark on that is that I am not a mental health professional. So anything that I'm saying or reflecting upon in the realm of mental health does not represent a professional opinion, but rather represents what little bit I've been able to glean from conversations with professionals or panels that I've shared with professionals, or things that I have read, and how I believe that they overlap with some of the concepts that we have in Islam. So that should be the opening remark. We just last week, not this one, the one before, had a panel on mental health in Islam at UCLA. And we had Khala Nuha Shughairi there, who's done workshops here before. And one of the things that we spoke about, I was tasked to speak about, is this idea of mental health in Islam and the Muslim tradition, and whether or not there are overlaps and so on and so forth. The first thing, one of the things that comes to mind in the beginning is that when we think about mental health, we often confine that to mental illness. And mental health is actually, it's about mental health. So there are issues of the positive side and there are issues of the negative side as well, or the side that needs some help. So this is number one. Number two is one of the things Khala Nuha said, which just blew my mind, was essentially when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about people's thoughts and their emotions and feelings and their behaviors. And why that's incredible to me and mind-blowing to me is because their thoughts, people's thoughts, their emotions and feelings, and their behavior. And these are the three categories that everything in Islam breaks down into. And certainly, Islam wants us to be whole. One of the things that Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah Hafidhullah always says is, he says that, may Allah give us the tawfiq to help people become whole again. Islam definitely wants us to be whole. And with all of the things that we face, all of the difficulties that we struggle with, sometimes people become a little bit fractured. And sometimes things need to be reset. And sometimes we need to call upon the values and things that we have in our tradition that can help us with that. One of our teachers, Shaykh Zakaria Siddiqi, Hafidhullah, he used to say, لا ينصر الإسلام من هو محزوم في نفسي. لا ينصر الإسلام من هو محزوم في نفسي. That Islam will not be given aid or victory by those who are defeated in themselves. Islam will not be given aid or victory by those who are defeated in themselves. And so part of mental health is figuring out and walking and taking the path towards rectifying ourselves so that we can be whole and we can be true embodiments of this message that we have. And so when we think about this concept of people's thoughts and their emotions and their behaviors, we're reminded, of course, of Hadith Jibril. Everyone knows what Hadith Jibril is. We'll have to review it. but it's always good to review. I think many people probably know. Hadith Jibril is the second hadith in the collection of Imam al-Nawawi, his 40 hadith. And Hadith Jibril was called by Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, rahimahullah, one of the greatest scholars of Islam. Ibn Daqiq al-Eid called Hadith Jibril Sunnah. He said this hadith is Sunnah. And what the body of idea that he's pulling from there is that Surah Al-Fatiha is called Quran. Fatiha is called Quran. Meaning what? Meaning the Fatiha is the comprehender, it combines all of the Quran, all of the meanings. Is a mother, but is also comes from like an origin of bringing things together. And so Quran is the Fatiha, because the Fatiha covers the whole Quran. And Sunnah, as Ibn Daqiq al-Eid said about the hadith of Jibril, is Sunnah because it covers the teachings of the Sunnah. And that's the hadith of Jibril alayhi salam, where Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh says, we were sitting with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and a man came in upon us, and his hair was very black and his clothes was very white, and he didn't have any signs of travel. And he came into the gathering and he sat in front of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he put his knees on his thighs and he asked him, O Messenger of Allah, what is Iman? And he said, it is to believe in Allah and His Messenger and the books and the Day of Judgment and Qadr. And he gave the answer of the articles of faith. And he said, you've told the truth. And it continues. He asked him, what is Islam? He says, Islam is to bear witness, the Shahada. It's to establish the prayer, pay zakat, fast in Ramadan, make hajj if you're able to do so. He said, yes. He said, what is Ihsan? He said, Ihsan is to worship Allah as if you see Him. And even though you don't see Him, you know that He sees you. And then he said, what are the signs? When is the hour? And he said, Man mas'ulu bi a'lam min as-sa'il, that the one who's being asked doesn't know better than the one who's asking. He said, then what are some of its amarat? What are some of its signs? He said, some of its signs are that the woman will give birth, the master will give birth to her, or the slave will give birth to her master, and that the barefooted Bedouins will compete with one another to build the tallest buildings. And then he left. Okay, this ended the hadith. So this hadith is Hadith Jibril, and Hadith Jibril represents the three major areas of Islamic studies. And the three major areas of Islamic studies are Iman, Aqidah, and Islam, Fiqh, and everything that revolves around it, and Ihsan, which is Tazkiyah. So these three areas basically deal with the mind and how we think. Iman deals with the mind and how we think. Fiqh deals with the body and how we behave. And Ihsan deals with the heart and what it feels, what kind of emotions it has. So you see why when she said what she said, I was like blown away a little bit. Because these are the three areas. These are the three areas that we have concern about. The entire body of Iman deals with this question. So when we talk about mental health, we have to always come back to this foundation. I believe it was Dr. Imad Ba'youn, may Allah preserve him, one of our local teachers, right? Who I believe I was told, he said, I have this piece of information and I have a feeling that he said it. I'm not entirely sure, and I can't remember if I heard it or someone told me. So I don't know the isnad, and so it's all messed up. But the idea is that the concept was, I shouldn't attribute it to him at all, even though if it was his, I don't want to steal it. But the idea was that oftentimes when people have issues in their lives, and the things that they're facing, comprehending those things, dealing with them, acting appropriately in the face of them, and so on, you can trace the problem back to an issue with an understanding of one of Allah's names. And this was a beautiful concept. How do you, and just this idea of understanding Allah's names and how that impacts your mind and how you process the world. The same thing with the articles of faith. And many times, even the books of Aqidah will start with the whole section on the mind, on logic. And what are the types of, we can't talk about, for example, they'll talk about Allah. And they'll say, what is wajib? Like, what is, from a mental category, what is necessarily true about Allah? It's necessarily true that He's wajib in wujud, for example, that He's necessarily existent. Or that He خُلْفُهُ لِخَلْقِهِ, that he is different than his creation. His creation is nothing similar to him at all. Or that he has an ghina, that everything is dependent upon him, right? And he is not dependent upon anything. These are all things that we say about Allah. But they'll talk about then, because of that, like, what is this kind of mental category of necessary things, or things that are impossible, or things that are possible? And so a lot of times the Aqidah books will even start with these issues of philosophy and logic and so on and so forth, dealing with the mind. And certainly acknowledging something as serious as the existence of God has major impacts on the mind. And it should have major impacts on the mind. Not just the heart, but just how we perceive things. And then there will be an interconnection, of course. One of the examples that I gave in the workshop was that I think that before I was a Muslim, I don't believe that I'm currently absolved of this issue, but it's definitely different. But before I was a Muslim, definitely struggled with things related to anxiety. And I think a lot of people in America struggle with anxiety. They have this kind of just discomfort about who they are and what they are, and making mistakes and all of these kind of things, and like what people are going to think of them and all this kind of stuff, right? Believing in God helped me a lot. Because believing in God, you get all of these principles, that there are principles in your mind and they affect your health, your mental health. Like, for example, as long as I did what's right with Allah, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. That has a huge impact on your life. Right? It has a huge impact on your mind. Oh, they're going to think I'm this or that or whatever. Who cares? If what I did was okay, what I did was okay. Right? Or, for example, that I am not Allah. And the necessary understanding of us not being Allah is that we make mistakes. We're finite beings that make mistakes. And we're not perfect. So I don't have to be perfect all the time. I can make mistakes. Like, that gives you a little bit of space where you don't have the same level of anxiety about making a mistake, for example. So there's things that we believe that should have an impact on how our mind works. Believing in the existence of God should have a major impact on how our mind works. Believing in angels should actually also have a major impact on how our mind works. Certainly in the Muslim community, our belief in jinn has an impact on how our minds work. But I often wonder whether or not our belief in angels has an impact on how our mind works. One time when we were at the masjid in Ramadan, I don't know if it was a couple years ago or whatever, we were in the masjid in Ramadan, it was late at night. And there's Taraweeh programs and qiyams and all this stuff. And some of the young people were there and they come running in. They're like, Shaykh, you never believe, what just happened. I'm like, okay, what happened? There was someone, we saw them. And they walked behind the trailer over there. And then, we went. And they were gone. And I'm like, okay. It's late. You guys probably didn't eat enough. And they're like, no. And they're like, Shaykh, we're really worried because we think it's a jinn. And, I'm thinking to myself, on a very serious note, why is it always jinn? Like, you're in Ramadan, it's in the middle of the night, you have a qiyam program, the Qur'an's being recited, all these people are worshipping Allah. Why do we have to go to jinn? Could it be like an angel? Can we have an angel instead for once? So my point is, we believe in different things that should impact how we look at the world. Right? We believe in, for example, messengers. Messengers should definitely impact how we believe in the world. One of the things about believing in messengers is just you have to believe that good people exist. You have to believe that good people exist. That's an important thing. It's a very important thing. And one of the big traumas that you deal with in mental health issues is what happens when people no longer believe that good people exist, and oftentimes it's because they had bad experiences with religious leaders, right? So then, like, these people who we used to hold in this position betrayed that trust. And so, do good people exist or not? But part of believing in messengers is believing that good people exist. And believing that there are people who carry the message of those messengers. And they have that ilm, as we were talking about in the Jum'ah today. There are people who have inherited the knowledge of the messengers. They live the shadow of the lives of the messengers. beautiful, amazing people. And then that makes you realize that people can attain to such good states, and that there's good in people, and that there's people that we should follow, and there's examples of how we should live, and so on. This affects our mind, right? Our thoughts, as well as the Day of Judgment affects our thoughts. Qadr affects our thoughts. Understanding that there's just limitations on things. Sometimes there's just limitations. And the relationship between aqeedah and tazkiyah, the relationship between the mind and the heart, is very close. They're like two sides of the same coin. That's why some of the scholars, they say that tazkiyah is like aqeedah applied, basically, at the end. If you apply aqeedah, you have tazkiyah. Because your heart what is the point of tazkiyah? Is to get your heart only concerned about Allah. So then you applied aqeedah, right? So these things are very close. Like Ibn Ata'illah Secondary rahimahullah, he says, "Sawabiq al-himam la takhriqu aswar al-aqdar." He says the greatest of aspirations, they don't break the walls of qadr. It doesn't matter how great your aspiration is. You can't break qadr. If it's not your qadr, it's not happening. Or if Allah has put certain aqdar and things, you can't skip them. So for example, alhamdulillah, we're at IOK. IOK has produced over the years and continues to produce a lot of huffaz. May Allah bless all of them and preserve them and their teachers and increase them exponentially in this life and the next, inshallah, ameen. There's qadr in hifz, is there not? You can't just be like, you know what, I think tomorrow I want to be a hafiz. It doesn't work that way. A certain amount you can memorize, you're going to memorize it, you're going to review it. If you don't review it, you're going to lose it. There's qadr in it. And so there's limitations. And that affects how we look at things. So all of this then is like very basic level of aqeedah and how we think about how that affects our mind. And how we should remind ourselves these things. We should remind ourselves what are the names of Allah. It's part of the reason why it's so important to have a regular relationship with the Quran. The Quran keeps bringing us back to foundational concepts. Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir. You feel like if you sit down and you read 10 pages of the Quran, you're going to find something that says Allah is qadir. It's a good reminder. Right? It's a good reminder. You're going to find something that says Allah is alim. You're going to find something that says Allah is hakim, that Allah is aziz, that Allah is ghafoor, that He forgives. Like, these are very important for our minds. How we perceive ourselves and others. The second major thing then in our behavior, fiqh. What can we and can't we do? And some behaviors are healthy for us and they protect us, and some behaviors destroy us. And it affects our mind afterwards, it affects our heart. If we break, and everything is tied. You'll see sometimes how you'll see them, they're doing very well. Right? Everything is good, whatever. Maybe they slip into a certain sin. And rather than confronting their problem with the sin, their mind starts to change and their heart starts to change, and they start reassessing all kinds of things. They start making excuses. They start changing Islam maybe in order to get past whatever their issue is. So the act then has an impact on the mind, on the heart, everything else. The third major category is the emotions, the heart. One of the major consequences of a serious path of tazkiyah is rida, contentment. In order to be content, you have to be whole. It takes a level of wholeness to be content. It doesn't mean you have to have everything. You could actually have very little and be content. But it's the issue of how we understand Allah and how we understand ourselves and how we make that part of our hearts. That is as short of a journey it is between our mind and our heart, man, it's such a far road, is it not? It's such a far road. I remember one of the brothers when we were in Egypt, his wife passed away unexpectedly. He was a student, his wife was there with him. She was, mashallah, would pray in the night, support the family, everything else. He was a student of knowledge, and she was pregnant, and she died. During her pregnancy. Rahimahullah. And I remember driving with the brother, and we're talking about what's going on, and we're kind of talking about how, she was pregnant. This is, you die the death of a shaheed. She had left her home, fi talab al-ilm, you die the death of a shaheed, and seeking knowledge. All of these different things we were talking about. And he was like, yeah, man, I know. He's like, I know all of that up here, and my problem is getting it in here. That is a long drive. Between those two things that are so close, it's a very long drive sometimes. So to get the rida in there is a very serious thing of our health and our well-being. And I'm sure people have seen others. I always think to myself about one of our teachers, Shaykh Ali Saleh, Hafidhullah, may Allah preserve him. I mean, just you meet these people in life that, I mean, you look at them and you feel as if they were given everything that a person could possibly be given. And then you look around them and you realize they have nothing. But it's that statement of one of the early righteous people that if the kings had known what we have in our hearts, then they would go and fight each other with their swords in order to get it. You know, if they knew this thing that we have inside of our hearts. You see these people. Shaykh Ali used to sit in his home, mostly blind. His wife is fully blind. He's an old man. He lives in a poor neighborhood. He doesn't even have a kitchen. He has like a stove in the hallway that leads to the bathroom, right? And Radi, like so content. Everything in life is his. Never hear like a word. Only complaint you would hear is Al-Azhar and the ulama in Azhar are not like they used to be. And we miss the old mashayikh. This was the only complaint. This is the only thing he would really complain about. Times have changed, basically. Times are not like they used to be. There used to be more mashayikh. There used to be so and so and so and so and so and so. But everything else, alhamdulillah. I mean, one time someone called, so I thought it was like a stranger or something. We realized at the end of the phone call while we were there, it's the Shaykh's daughter. The entire conversation's like, Assalamu alaikum, ya ahlan wa sahlan. He's so excited. Ya ahlan wa sahlan, alhamdulillah, how are you doing? Very good. Allah yakramik. The whole conversation's dua. And then he's like, inshallah, we'll see you soon. We hang up. He's like, it's my daughter. You think it's some person who called him to check on him or something, right? But subhanAllah, so everything is good. That's what you're going for in the end, right? This is mental health. On the health side, it's health. When all of those pieces come together, when the effort towards spiritual purification is combined with the effort of actually following the rules of Islam, is combined with the understanding of how to perceive the world as a result of our iman, and all of this comes together, then you get the package, right? So that was all an introduction. That was only based off of what Khala Noha had said. That mental health deals with our thoughts and our behaviors and our emotions. So Islam deals with our thoughts and our behaviors and our emotions. It shouldn't really, we don't need any other evidence to indicate that this is part of Islam. But I'll show you on the I think, Islam is incredible. We're usually at the very surface, and like the Mariana Trench is underneath us. Yeah. It's a massive body of knowledge and learning and experience, and everything is underneath, and we're just like floating on top, and we're looking at it and we're like, well, I don't know, it looks kind of stormy today. But you didn't look down. If you look down, then it's just subhanallah. And so I was asked one of the sisters in the community who works in mental health. I told her I'm giving I'm part of this workshop. Can you recommend anything from the Muslim perspective historically and so on? So she told me about this work, and she said that it's translated, so I found it, alhamdulillah. So this is the work of Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, and it's called Sustenance of the Soul in English. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, some of the things that he talked about in this book, some of the things that he said, and I'll read you some particular parts, and who this person was and why this matters. Basically, Abu Zayd al-Balkhi was a Muslim scholar, polyglot, mastered many different disciplines, as many early Muslims did. This is also part of Iman in many ways, is that if we believe that Allah is an Khaliq, then that means that everything in the creation is Allah's creation. And one of the things that they say about Surah Al-Fatiha is that Surah Al-Fatiha starts by telling us that Allah is Rabbul Alameen, and Al-Alam is filled with alamat, or it's filled with alams that give us ilm of the one who created it. So it's an amazing word. The word itself, the world, the word for the world, alam, comes from a root of alam, which is an indication. So like a ma'lam, for example, in the road is a marker, it's a milestone. An alam is a symbol, is an indicator. So the alam gives us an alam of al-alim, the one who knows all things. Like everything, Allah is the Lord of the creation, and all of the creation points us to the Creator. So in the end, if you really believe that, you're going to study all kinds of things, right? Because all of those things are going to be interesting, because all of them are going to lead you back to Allah, if they're halal and they're good and everything else, right? So Abu Zayd al-Balkhi was like that. He lived about 1,000 years ago. Okay, he lived about 1,000 years ago, and he wrote this book called Masalih al-Abdan wal-Anfus. And Masalih al-Abdan wal-Anfus is this book plus what came before it. So he wrote a work on basically medicine. Masalih al-Abdan is medicine. Different diseases, their cures, health, nutrition, especially early medicine. There's a lot of focus on nutrition, preventative care, right? And so on. And then he gets to Masalih al-Anfus, sustenance of the soul, is how they translated it. So what's incredible is 1,000 years ago, he's talking about this stuff. And basically what he's saying is that he's saying that as much as we are concerned for the health of our bodies, we should similarly be concerned with the health of our souls. And in this text, he goes over a number of things. He goes over, for example, fear, excessive fear. He goes over like anxiety, stress, obsessive compulsive disorders, essentially like a pre-modern version of obsessive compulsive disorders. And he talks about also depression. And he even categorizes depression into different levels, right? So again, this is 1,000 years ago. He's talking about these things. And he makes a very strong argument in the beginning of his text. And his argument, he's basically saying in the first chapter, what is the great need of being concerned about this issue? And the great need of it, he says, is that if we were to think about physical health, he says, many people can go extended periods of time without being afflicted by any sort of physical ailment. They might not get a cold, they might not have any problems, they might be good. Like I remember my dad, now he's getting a little bit older, but I don't remember like my dad ever being sick. Alhamdulillah. From age, 40 to 60, I don't really remember him being sick. And that's that can happen. People cannot really get sick very often. He says, on the other hand, when we're talking about the soul and the issues in the soul, people have problems with these every single day. And the other one he talks about in here is anger. Because anger management is part of mental health. In a modern context, anger management classes, they send you to a mental health therapist, right? Mental health professional. So he's talking about mental. He says, someone has a problem with anger, they're going to have a problem with anger every day, right? It's not going to be something that just every 5 years they get a cold. But it's going to be something that literally every single day they're going to be tested with something that's going to trigger their anger. So if they don't figure out how it is that they're going to treat their anger, that's going to be a constant problem that leads to their unhappiness. They're not going to be able to attain what they should be able to attain internally. Similarly, if someone struggles with a lot of obsessions, it's going to bother them all the time. If someone is experiencing a lot of sadness, and maybe coming into the realm of depression, then that's going to affect them in many, many ways. And it's going to affect them day in and day out. Right? So he says that actually, if we think about it and we start to analyze these things, we realize that it's more important than physical health. in physical medicine. So he says, for example, we start by saying that since man is composed of a body and soul, he is bound to face from each part of them fitness or weakness, health or sickness, or other symptoms that afflict his health in a negative way. The symptoms that afflict the body and upset its well-being are those such as fever, headaches, various kinds of pain that affect the organs. And the psychological symptoms that afflict a person are those such as anger, sorrow, fear, panic, and other similar manifestations. These psychological symptoms affect man much more frequently than bodily symptoms. Indeed, some people may almost never suffer from any or most bodily symptoms throughout much of their life. In contrast, these psychological symptoms cause people to suffer all of the time. So you see the point that he's trying to make. He says, so we shouldn't be heedless of this. And then he says also something very interesting. He says, I know a lot of people that have written in the medical side that we talked about before me. And then he said, and I don't know anyone who's written on this before me. Imagine being in this kind of intellectual milieu. I don't know anyone who's written on this before me. And he starts to then break it down and go into different areas. So he says that the human soul can be healthy or unhealthy in the same way that a body can be unhealthy or healthy. So the unhealthy soul is going to manifest issues like panic, anger, anxiety, sorrow, all of these things when it's unhealthy. And the body preserves, it's better to preserve rather than treat afterwards. Better to preserve rather than treat afterwards. And this is one of the things that we have to have confidence in, is that the body of Islam is a body of teachings that benefits us. The scholars, they say that the mission statement of Islam basically is Jalb al-Masalih wa Dar al-Mafasid. It is to acquire benefits and repel harms. This is what Islam does for you. If you really follow Islam, you learn Islam, you be with the people who carry the way of the Prophet ﷺ. You might have ups and downs, but in the end, if you look back, you realize I got a lot of benefit out of this, and I was saved a lot of drama from this. Lot of issues. The example that I usually give is in high school. Most of the fights you see people get into, why are they getting into fights? Usually, it had something to do with women. Guys in high school, usually the fight had something to do with women. If you don't do anything before you get married, you don't have any of these problems. You're not going to be getting in fights in high school, right? Or if you don't have arrogance and all these type of things. Of course, sometimes you have self-defense. That's a different issue. But it saves you a lot of headache. Islam saves us a lot of problems. So it says that this prevention is better than treatment afterwards. And just as the body has means of prevention, like diet, like health, like exercise, all of these kind of things that he talks about in the first half of the book, the soul also has means of prevention. So he says that, the soul must be protected from those things that can attack or affect the soul externally or internally. So he says that externally you protect the soul from outside elements such as what a person hears or sees that may worry or disturb him, causing arousal of emotions that include anger, panic, sadness, or fear, and other similar responses. One of the things that I think about, what do you generally see when you see a Muslim who's totally on top of all of the problems all over the world in the news? The person's not doing so well. They're not doing so well. The soul cannot handle it. This is my leaning, is that the soul cannot handle it. Except if you're a very special person. Average person cannot handle these kind of things. And I don't think we're actually meant to know all of these things. That's an extension of my theory. If you wind back and you don't have modern communications, you don't know all these things. You might know that there's a war going on somewhere. You might know that people are dying, but you don't have the video on your feed every single day. This many people died, and this is the video of how it happened, and this many people are starving, and this is the way they look, and this is going on, this is going on, and this is going on every single day. 50 times, 75 times, 100 times, you're seeing these images, you're seeing these statements, you're seeing these numbers. You do it for every day, months on end. And then there's a terrorist attack, and then Muslims are getting oppressed at home too, and then you don't want to go to the grocery store. And next thing you know, the person is just faza', it's hard, right? So we have to be very conscious of this. Like how much of this, I need a little bit of this. I have to know some of these things because these are my brothers and sisters, because I'm concerned about oppression and justice and all of this kind of stuff. But if I know so much of this stuff that I debilitate myself, I'm not helping anyone now. I can't do anything good now. So he's talking about external things that will cause a person to have anger, panic, sadness, fear. Sometimes it's just we're taking too much in from the outside. He says also internally we have to protect the soul. So he says internally means to protect the soul from internal symptoms of negative thinking about what may harm the person with respect to the symptoms of disorders that we have described. They just starts feeding itself. You get all of these external things, and then you repeat them over and over internally. So you're just playing them over and over and over again. So then it affects the soul as well. And he says one can heal themselves using two methods. First, this is an interesting one. He says, first, when feeling peaceful and when the faculties of the soul are in a tranquil state, one can convince that this is a very important, what he's saying. You do this when the soul is at a tranquil state. You don't do this when you're in the middle of your mess. Right? You might be in a hole. You don't do it then. You do it when you're in a better place. It says you convince yourself in your heart and in your mind that this dunya was not created to give people whatever they want. This dunya was not created for you to be in paradise. And this is, I think, one of our biggest problems too. Psychologically, we act as if we're supposed to be in paradise right now. And I mean, we have rivers, and we have water, and we have lawns, and we have palaces, and we have gold in our homes. We have like all of these marble floors. Like, are we in Jannah already? And then what happens is you don't get Jannah because it's not Jannah, right? So you have to, then you get in that state and you help yourself. So this is the inherent nature of this life. It's another thing that in a different place that he says that you could do is like when you're in a better state, you think about those things that are positive and good, and you hold on to them. And then what you do is you bring them out when you go in a bad state. It's funny actually because, for better or for worse, I'm referencing it. It's a song that I used to listen to before I was a Muslim, but you could take it whichever, people can do whatever they want. But he says, he's talking about a nice summer day, right? The poet, we'll call him a poet, he's talking about a nice summer day, okay? And he says, I wish I could take this feeling and put it in a plastic jar. And then whenever there's a problem, I won't do the actual rhyme, but whenever there's a problem, I'll take it out and I'll open the jar, right? So it's like, the idea is you have these beautiful experiences in life. So like, remember that. And then put it in like your little imaginary jar. And when you go through a bad time, then you open the jar. And you're reminded, that these things pass. There's ups and downs. So, anyways, the point is we can't go through all of his book, but he said some very interesting things. There were some in particular that I marked, but I don't even remember why I marked them now. Maybe I can find the last one here. Yeah. So one of the things he talks about is how sometimes you need external advice. He basically talks about counseling. At this point, he's basically talking about counseling. He says, that is the benefit one obtains externally. I'll read you the whole part. Additionally, we see that just as in treating bodily illnesses, the external help one receives from therapeutic diets or a physician's prescription is more useful than a person's own internal treatment, such as preventing consumption of certain foods. So it is respect with psychological disorders. So basically he's saying is like, there's a reason why people have diet plans. It's because it's hard to do it yourself. You need some help from the outside, right? This is the same thing with your psychological issues, that sometimes you need to talk to other people. It says that is the benefit one obtains externally from advice and counseling is more useful than a person's internal attempt at treatment through generating their own therapeutic thoughts. This is for two reasons. First, man generally accepts from others what he doesn't accept from himself. These scholars, they're very real. They get you straight to the point. First, people don't usually accept from themselves what they accept from others. Second, one suffering painful psychological symptoms is so occupied and overpowered by them that he cannot clearly think how to overcome them. And so they need advice from someone else. So he's basically calling towards therapy at that time. The last point I'll make is about depression. and how he distinguishes actually between two different types of depression. I think he does three, but we'll focus on two. So he says that there's depression that's less severe, and this can be treated with therapy, like talking to people and getting advice and getting that support and conversation and so on. And then he says that there's a second level of depression that actually gets into the biological side, and it needs to be treated with medication, basically. He said in their time, medication, which is basically they need to adjust their diet and figure out how the internal things are impacting with one another and so on. And diet is a big issue in these things. But he's saying is that it can't only be treated through talking to people. There's internal things going on biologically that need to be treated, which will then open the door for being able to talk to people. So it's fascinating that he did that so long ago, because that's, a relatively recent phenomenon. A lot of these things that he's talking about 1,000 years ago were literally beginning to be discussed and debated about and thought about in the last 100 to 150 years, 200 years, So the point is to say that mental health is something that's important in our tradition. We should look at it as a means of gaining a wholeness in ourselves and coming to terms with ourselves and our actions, our thoughts, our emotions, and everything else. There is great guidance, especially preventatively, of how to deal with these things in the core sources of Islam. And there's guidance even in terms of treatment in the later sources of Islam. And the last thing is that we shouldn't be hesitant or afraid of benefiting from professionals in this field. It's not like some sort of taboo thing. It doesn't make you a loser. It doesn't mean that your iman is bad or whatever it might be. It just means that you might be going through something. It's hard to process it by yourself, and you need professionals that can help. And alhamdulillah, in our community, you're having more and more people that have some understanding of Islam, and they're going into these fields. Ideally, we would have people that have good understanding of Islam and go into these fields. So if we had people who were going through like the seminary, and then they went and they got mental health training, and they were able to understand Islam well enough to really sift through, okay, we're good on this, but maybe we have a little bit of a different take on that, and really then like 5, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you have people that are great experts in these fields. It would be incredible. And it would be a great gift to all of the people, not just the Muslims. But, this is something that's very important. And we need to be whole, because we want to be those who, first of all, meet Allah with qalb salim. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ salim. You want to meet Allah with a heart that's whole. Now, those are the ones who gain Allah's forgiveness. And also we want to be those who can serve and help others. As I said in the beginning, لَا يَنصُرُ الْإِسْلَامِ مَنْ هُوَ مَهْزُومٌ فِي نَفْسِهِ. That Islam is not given victory by those who are defeated in themselves. So we want to gain to this level of wholeness. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us and to accept from us and to guide us to that which is best, inshallah. Ameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslima kathira. Jazakumullah khairan. Any questions or comments anyone wants to share? If anyone came in late, I made a disclaimer in the beginning that I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just sharing some thoughts. Okay, so don't go and embark on a course of treatment based on something that I said. Anyone? Any comments? Yes.
I guess my question is how would you define a modern polymath? And do you think it's feasible for people to become a modern polymath, as opposed to becoming having general knowledge in each field? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I don't know. It's a tough question. Certainly times are different. I've heard Shaykh Hamza Yusuf say before that someone like Imam al-Ghazali had pretty much mastered whatever knowledge there was to have in his time. And you can't really do that anymore. I mean, it's just the bodies of knowledge are so vast that mastering the Hanafi madhab is difficult enough. It'd take you 20 years and then forget everything else. So I don't know. I don't know that it's possible. I think certainly there are people who have high levels of specialization in multiple fields. And I think a lot is possible also if you have a culture that enables that and supports that, and you have opportunity and resources that enable that and support that. I think one of the worst things we have in speaking as someone who went through most of, am I still in that point? Yes, most of my life not as a Muslim, our culture for education and learning in America is horrific. It's just so bad. It's not about learning. It's really not. It's not about being interested in things and learning things and all. It's about passing classes to go to universities, to get pieces of paper, to get jobs and pay off debts. I mean, it's basically what it comes down to, and that's just really bad. Except for a handful of, people. There's exceptions, but that makes it hard, because if you're like anything similar to me, you didn't care about learning anything seriously in life until you were 20 years old, and at that point you lost a lot of time. Whereas if you have people who are literally caring about learning and being supported in their concern for learning from the age of 5, it's going to be very different. The second thing that I would say on this is that it would be interesting to look at, but I would imagine that these people became like that through not simultaneously mastering fields. And I think that it's kind of like in fiqh. Fiqh is probably a good example of this. In fiqh, if you just study all of the madhahib, you can study fiqh for like 5-6 years and end up a mess. You still don't remember anything. You just don't. And even in your fiqh as a skill might not actually be very strong. You know a lot of opinions, but your the malaka fiqhiyya, like the fiqh acumen, hasn't been developed. Whereas someone who had spent like 5 years studying one school and mastering it, and then the 6th year they looked at the other opinions, they'd probably be stronger. Both of them spent 6 years. But there's an underlying skill for how you process information and think about ideas and information and knowledge and so on that needs to be developed. So I think that when people attain like a certain level of mastery, that cognitive frame and psychological framework for how to deal with information when you've achieved mastery facilitates the mastery of other fields. It doesn't automatically make you a master, but it makes your road to mastery quicker. And this is all just theory, but I don't know, I could be wrong. Just my thoughts. I've seen it in my own life. I'm weaker in fiqh than I should be. I know people who are very strong, like Shaykh Arsalan, one of my classmates. He was very strict about only doing the Shafi'i school, and he would study what he had to study for his classes and stuff, but everything revolves around the Shafi'i school. Every question, every thought, every answer, everything. So at the end, the beginning stages, that person feels like they're not as far. And then in the later stages, you realize they're like 20 miles ahead. So, Hafidhullah, may Allah preserve him and increase him. He's in Texas. Yes. Abu Zayd al-Balkhi. Abu Zayd al-Balkhi. Balkh is in modern day Afghanistan, for anyone who's wondering. طيب, alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah bless and preserve all of you and us, inshallah, and this beautiful, beautiful institution and its founders and its supporters and those who have had anything to do with its establishment and maintenance and sustenance, inshallah. Ameen. Jazakumullah khairan. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam taslima kathira. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.